Name is Daniel Rusk. I was 29 years old when it happened, June 18th, 2014. It's a night I wish I could erase from my memory. But the truth is, some nights aren't meant to be forgotten. Some nights burn themselves into your mind like a permanent scar. Back then, I worked as a delivery driver for a furniture company out of a small town called Briarfield, tucked away somewhere in central Kansas. I wasn't married, didn't have kids. My whole life revolved around long drives, black coffee, and the radio humming low in the background. I'd often drive late at night, past the usual closing hours because the roads were quieter then. No traffic, just me, the highway, and the sound of my own breathing. I'd always liked gas stations at night. There was something strangely comforting about the glow of fluorescent lights on otherwise empty roads, the hum of the pump, the distant ringing of the bell above the store door when someone walked in. Those quiet, still places made me feel less alone. But looking back now, I realize that quiet places can hold the darkest secrets. On that particular night, I was hauling a delivery to a small property outside of Willow Creek, a forgotten little place with one main road and more wheat fields than people. I was supposed to make the drop early the next morning, so I figured I'd stop halfway, refuel, grab a cup of coffee, and sleep a few hours in my truck. The place I stopped was a gas station off Highway 81. I still remember the sign clearly. It read Kendrick's Gas and Go. The letters were chipped, and the light flickered like it was struggling to stay alive. There was only one other car in the lot, a faded blue sedan with no license plate. The windows were so tinted I couldn't see inside. I didn't think much of it at the time. A lone car at a 24-hour station wasn't exactly unusual. I just figured someone was inside paying or taking a nap. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. There was a tall man behind the counter. His name tag said Warren. He had sharp cheekbones, slick black hair, and eyes so pale they almost looked gray. He gave me a stiff smile, not a warm one, just a smile that said, "I see you." "Evening," he said, voice growly like someone who smoked a pack. "Evening," I replied, heading straight for the coffee machine. As I poured my cup, I noticed a faint buzz from the lights. Warren, he never took his eyes off me. Not once. I grabbed a stale-looking sandwich, paid, and headed back outside, but something stopped me just before I reached the door. There was a mirror behind the counter. In the reflection, I could see the blue sedan still parked outside. Its driver's door was cracked open. Not all the way, but my gut told me to glance toward that sedan. The door was still cracked open, no one in sight. My stomach tightened, but I brushed it off. Maybe someone had gone to the bathroom around the back. I climbed into my truck, locked the doors, and set my coffee down. I was about to rest my head when I heard it. 3 soft knocks, not on my window, on my truck bed. It was slow, deliberate, like who or whatever was back there. Didn't want to scare me. They wanted to let me know they were there. I froze. At first, I thought it might be the wind, but there was no wind. Then maybe an animal, but the knocks were too steady, too human. I turned off the cabin light. Everything outside was dark except the flickering glow from the gas station sign. Slowly, I reached into the glove compartment and grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept there. I counted to 3 in my head, flung the door open, and jumped out. Nothing. No one behind the truck. The sedan door was now wide open, and the interior light was dead, like the battery had been drained. The only sound I could hear was the crunch of gravel under my boots. I circled the truck twice, still nothing. I started to feel foolish, like maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. So I climbed back into the cab, locked the door, and told myself I'd get a couple of hours of sleep. That's when the radio in my truck flicked on by itself. I hadn't touched it. The volume was low, but a voice, faint static fill came through. It wasn't music, it was whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it was a voice. Male, calm, like someone talking just loud enough for you to know they're there, but not loud enough to understand. My hands started to shake. I reached for the ignition to turn everything off. Before I could, I saw movement in my side mirror. A shadow, tall, standing right behind the open sedan. I held my breath. The shadow started walking slowly toward my truck. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark figure moving like it had all the time in the world. My brain screamed at me to drive off, but my body wouldn't listen. When it reached the back of my truck, it stopped. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Then slowly the shadow bent down and I heard the sound of metal scraping against metal. I slammed the ignition, floored the gas, and tore out of that lot like hell itself was chasing me. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figure straighten up and wave. Not like a threat, just a slow, almost casual wave. I drove 10 miles before pulling over at a well-lit rest area. My hands were still trembling when I finally got out to check the truck. There on the back bumper were long, deep gouges, like someone had dragged a knife or something sharp across. I reported it to the sheriff's department in Willow Creek the next morning. They sent a deputy to check the station. You know what he told me? Kendrick's Gas and Go hasn't been open in years. He said the building had been shut down since 2009 after a murder-suicide involving the owner and a drifter. I swear to you, I stood inside that station. I bought coffee. I talked to Warren, but according to the sheriff, the place was boarded up. I didn't believe it, so I drove back a week later in broad daylight. What I saw made my stomach drop. The sign was still there, but the station was covered in plywood. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds. There was no sedan, no lights, no Warren, just an empty, forgotten building sitting in silence on Highway 81. For months after that night, I couldn't drive past a gas station after dark without my chest tightening. I'd see reflections in mirrors, hear whispers in the radio static. I even quit my delivery job a year later. I told myself it was just stress, exhaustion, hallucinations. But some nights, especially when the air is still and the roads are quiet, I swear I can still hear those 3 soft knocks on the back of my truck in that wave. I'll never forget that wave. This story is over. Get ready for the next one. Hit subscribe for more chilling tales. My name is Lucas Renner. I'm 27 years old, and the night that changed my life forever was on October 14th, 2018. I remember every single detail of that night as if it's etched into the back of my mind with a hot iron. It was a cool fog-draped evening in the small town of Willow Creek, tucked somewhere off a lonely stretch of Route 41 in rural Kentucky. If you've ever driven through country highways at night, you know how it feels like the darkness has a heartbeat of its own. I was on my way back from a friend's wedding in Nashville. My car, a beat-up 2007 silver sedan with over 200,000 miles, wasn't exactly built for long drives anymore, but it was all I had. The wedding had ended late, and I had chosen to save money and drive home through the night rather than book a motel. It was a decision I'd regret for the rest of my life. Around 1:20 a.m., my fuel gauge hovered on empty. I remember muttering a curse to myself as the yellow warning light blinked like an impatient eye. I hadn't planned to be out this late, but after lingering goodbyes and a detour thanks to construction, I was stranded in a part of Kentucky I barely knew. My phone had 1 bar of service. The world outside my windshield was just a blur of black trees and the occasional abandoned barn. That's when I spotted it. A dimly lit sign glowing weakly in the fog like a tired firefly. Halbrook Gas and Service. The place looked like it hadn't seen real business in years. But I didn't care. Gas was gas. I slowed down, turned into the cracked, uneven pavement, and rolled up to the only pump with a flickering light above. The station itself was a squat old building with peeling green paint and a faded sign that probably once advertised something cheerful. The windows were fogged up or dirty. Couldn't tell which. The pump didn't even have a digital display. It was one of those ancient ones with spinning numbers. But I figured as long as it worked, that was all that mattered. Before I stepped out, I remember hesitating. It wasn't the kind of hesitation you get when you forget your wallet. No, this was a strange kind of stillness in my chest, like some part of me already knew something wasn't right. The air felt heavy, colder than it had been on the road, and the fog was unusually thick here. My headlights barely lit more than a few feet ahead. I got out, swiped my card, and was relieved when the pump actually accepted it. The night was silent, except for the hum of my engine and the slow clicking of the numbers on the pump. That's when I noticed the bell. It wasn't a modern motion sensor. Old-fashioned bell hanging over the door of the station store. It jingled once, just once. I froze. The door hadn't moved. at least not that I could see through the fog. I scanned the lot. No other cars, no other people. I shook it off, convincing myself the wind must have done it. That's what I told myself anyway. When the tank was almost full, I decided to head inside to grab a coffee. The wedding drinks were wearing off, and I needed something to keep me awake for the rest of the drive. As I approached the door, a chill crept up my spine. It was one of those old wooden doors with a cloudy glass panel, the kind where you can barely make out shapes behind it. I pushed it open, and the bell above let out a flat, tired jingle. The inside smelled like dust and old motor oil. A single fluorescent light buzzed from the ceiling, flickering occasionally, making the whole place look like it was breathing. The aisles were narrow, shelves half empty, stocked with old candy and canned goods that looked decades out of date. And then there was the man behind the counter. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, and rail-thin, with sunken cheeks and pale skin that looked like it hadn't seen daylight in years. His hair was gray and stringy, hanging over his forehead. He wore a faded brown jacket and stared at me without blinking, as if he'd been expecting me. "Evening," I muttered, trying to sound casual. The man didn't answer. He just tilted his head slightly like a curious bird. I grabbed a coffee from the rusty machine in the corner and walked to the counter. He scanned it, or at least pretended to. His hands were thin and bony, and his fingernails were too long. "Pump 2, I said. My voice cracked a little, and I hated how uneasy I sounded. His lips stretched into a slow, unnatural smile. "I know," he whispered. His voice was growly, like someone who hadn't used it in a while. That was the moment I should have left. I should have grabbed my coffee, jumped in my car, and sped out of that godforsaken place. But I didn't. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe curiosity, maybe something deeper, something that lured me into staying just a few seconds too long. I handed him a $20 bill. His fingers brushed mine, cold as stone. Then the lights flickered again, longer this time. And in that brief darkness, I swear I heard breathing. Not from the man, from somewhere deeper inside the store. When the lights steadied, the clerk was still smiling, but now there was something in his eyes, something alive, something wrong. "Long way from home, ain't you?" he asked softly. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, just passing through." His grin widened, stretching unnaturally. No one ever just passes through. I laughed nervously and stepped back. That's when I noticed the back door. It was slightly open, just a crack. But I saw a movement behind it, a shadow, then another. My throat went dry. The bell jingled again, but I hadn't moved. Neither had the man. That was when I realized there was someone else in the store. A low creak echoed from one of the aisles. My eyes darted toward it, and I caught a glimpse of a hand. A pale, dirty hand with dark veins, pulling back behind the shelves. My instincts screamed at me to run, but before I could, the man spoke again. "Once they come out," he whispered, "they don't like it when people leave." I bolted. I didn't say a word. I ran out of that store so fast, the bell above the door nearly ripped off its hinge. The fog outside seemed thicker, pressing against my skin. My car looked farther away than I remembered. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. Behind me, I heard the door cack open slowly, then footsteps. They weren't normal footsteps. They were soft, dragging sounds like someone or something was sliding its feet across the pavement. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I dove into the car, slammed the door shut, and locked. Through the windshield, I saw them. 2 figures, one tall and hunched, the other crawling on all fours like a spider with broken legs. Their faces were pale and hollow, their eyes sunk in black. And the clerk, he just stood in the doorway watching me with that same smile, his head tilted. The crawling figure moved fast, unnaturally fast. It reached the passenger side and slammed its hand against the window. I screamed, started the engine, and floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched as I tore out of the lot. I didn't look back, at least not until I was a mile down the road. When I finally glanced in the rear view mirror, the fog behind me seemed alive. But the gas station, it was gone, completely gone. Just an empty, dark stretch of road where it should have been. I didn't stop driving until I hit the next town. My hands were shaking and the coffee had spilled all over my shirt. But I didn't care. I stumbled into a diner, pale and trembling, and tried to tell the waitress what I'd seen. She just stared at me like I was crazy. Later, I tried to find Hellbrook Gas and Service online. There was nothing, no record, No listing, not even a trace on any map. Locals told me that station had burned down in the early 1990s after a terrible accident that killed several people inside. But I know what I saw. I know what chased me that night. I haven't driven at night alone since. And every time I pass a gas station with a flickering light, I feel that same chill crawl up my spine, because somewhere out there on Route 41, they're still waiting. This story is over. Get ready for the next one. Hit subscribe for more chilling tales. My name is Jacob Trent, and I was 28 years old when it happened. October 17th, 2017. I'll never forget that night as long as I live. Some memories fade with time, but some burn themselves into your mind like they're branded on your soul. This one was the latter. It began on a quiet Tuesday evening on an empty stretch of Highway 83, somewhere between the small town of Riverton and a nowhere place called Hollow Bend. I was driving home from a long day of work, not expecting anything more than a few hours on the road, a late dinner, and bed. But what I found instead was something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. At the time, I worked as a regional delivery driver. My routes often took me across desolate highways and through towns that most people didn't even know existed. It was part of the job. That night, the delivery had run late, and I was behind schedule by almost 2 hours. The sky had already darkened when I passed the last gas for 60 mi sign, and my tank was dipping lower than I'd have liked. I remember seeing that sign glowing faintly in the beam of my headlights and thinking, I should probably stop there. I'd been on that stretch of road before, maybe 3 or 4 times. There was a gas station about 20 meters ahead, an old one with a flickering red sign that always looked like it belonged in a ghost story. I didn't like stopping there much. It was called Grayson's Pump and Go, run down and strangely quiet even during the day. The kind of place where the air feels heavier and the silence presses against your ears. But that night, with my fuel gauge flirting dangerously close to empty, I didn't have a choice. The highway itself was silent, except for the hum of my engine and the distant chirping of crickets. I drove with one hand on the wheel, the other on my coffee cup, trying to keep myself awake. I remember passing abandoned barns and endless fields that looked like black oceans under the night sky. There were no other cars on the road. Not one. That kind of emptiness has a way of making you feel like you're the last person on Earth. I thought about calling someone, my brother maybe, or my friend Nate, but I didn't have a signal. My phone had been losing bars since out there in the middle of nowhere, the world can go quiet real fast. When I finally saw the station, it was like spotting a distant island after drifting too long at sea. The red neon sign buzzed faintly, half the letters dead. Instead of reading Grayson's Pump and Go, it said Granz's Poo Pee. I pulled in slowly, the crunch of gravel beneath my tires, the only sound. It was around 10:14 p.m. The place looked like it hadn't changed since the 1980s. The paint peeled from the walls. One of the pumps was wrapped in caution tape, and the convenience store's windows were coated in a thin film of grime. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting a pale, sickly glow over the lot. I stepped out of my truck, the night air colder than it should have been. There was an old man sitting behind the counter inside the station. I noticed him through the dusty window as I approached. His posture was stiff, like he'd been sitting there for years. He had a thin face, almost skeletal, and a cap pulled low over his forehead. When I entered the store, the bell above the door gave a weak little ting, and he looked up at me without a word. His eyes were pale blue, uncomfortably pale, like cloudy ice. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond at first, he just stared. Then after a few seconds that stretched too long, he muttered in a rasping voice, "Pump 3 still works." I gave a quick nod and went back out to my truck. That kind of weird wasn't new to me. I'd passed through plenty of strange little towns in my time. Not everyone's friendly. But what bothered me wasn't just him. It was the silence around me. There was no hum of passing cars, no insects, no wind rustling through the dry grass, just the faint buzz of that broken neon sign. When I started pumping gas, I noticed something else, a shape. At first, it was just a flicker in the reflection of my truck's window, a shadow moving where nothing else was moving. It was near the edge of the lot, just past where the light stopped. My stomach tightened. I turned around quickly, expecting maybe a stray dog or a late-night traveler, but there was nothing there. Just darkness swallowing the road. I told myself I was tired, that I was seeing things, but deep down I felt it, that crawling sense of being watched. When the tank finally filled, I replaced the nozzle and went back inside to pay. The old man was still sitting exactly as I'd left him. No radio played, no TV flickered, just him and that awful silence. "That'll be $42.50, he rasped as I handed him the cash. I glanced behind the counter. On the wall hung a dusty bulletin board filled with old newspaper clippings. Something about missing hikers. A family's car found abandoned. A man never seen again after stopping for gas on Highway 83. I didn't read it all, but one date caught my eye. October 17th, 1997, exactly 20 years earlier. The old man saw me looking. "People don't listen to the signs," he said softly. "They always stop." "What signs?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just slid my change across the counter and looked past me like something was standing behind me. I turned, but the store was empty. When I stepped back outside, the temperature had dropped even more. I swear the air felt thick, like breathing through wet cloth. That's when I saw the figure clearly for the first time. At the far end of the lot, just outside the reach of the flickering light, stood a man, or something shaped like a man. He was tall, thin, with shoulders that slumped forward unnaturally. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. I froze. I thought maybe it was another traveler, but something was wrong. His outline didn't move like a person. It didn't sway, didn't shift. It was too still. "Sir, you need something," I called out. No answer. The old man's voice came from behind me, low and shaking. "Get in your truck. Don't talk." I spun around to look at him, but he'd already locked the door from the inside. His eyes were wide, and his lips moved silently, like he was praying. When I turned back, the figure was closer. Not by walking, not by moving, just closer, like the darkness itself had swallowed the distance. My hands fumbled for my keys. The air filled with a faint, low hum like static on a dead TV channel. I jumped into the truck and slammed the locks down. My headlights caught the thing as it stepped fully into view. Its face wasn't right, too long. The mouth stretched too wide, a grin carved where a grin shouldn't be. Its clothes looked like they were soaked in something dark, clinging to its thin frame. As I started the engine, the lights flickered. The truck stuttered like something was pulling power from it. Then the radio came on by itself, static first, then a whispering voice. "You stopped. Too long." I floored the gas. The truck roared and lurched forward. In the rear view mirror, I saw the thing standing dead center in the lot, its head tilted at a sharp angle, watching me as I sped down the highway. For miles, my heart hammered like a drum. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. My hands were slick with sweat on the wheel. Somewhere around mile marker 91, the static cut off and the temperature began to rise again. When I finally got home, I collapsed in my driveway, shaking like I'd run through a nightmare I couldn't wake from. A week later, I tried to find that gas station again. I drove the same route, but when I reached where it should have been, there was nothing. Just empty highway and a rotting billboard. Locals said Grayson's Pump and Go had been shut down for over 15 years. I know what I saw. I know I was there. That night on October 17th changed me. I don't drive highways alone after dark anymore. And I never ever stop at old gas stations. This story is over. Get ready for the next one. Hit subscribe for more chilling tales. All from the series